Hey, this is Frank. You're listening to an Origins episode of the Unbecoming Platypus podcast. Do you ever feel like you have friends who sometimes just don't get each other? This is a podcast that I recorded with two of my friends, Jake and Noah. We find out the hard ways we struggle to communicate better and sometimes succeed, but sometimes not. For years, the three of us have talked about communication and how it's sometimes easier said than done. Even when we're trying to be understanding, our well-meaning intentions often get lost in translation. We decided to share these conversations with the world. Join us as we find out what happens when three friends try to learn how to really talk to each other.
Jake really wanted that bit.
I really did. Well, I wasn't going to let it go. I mean, that was solid gold, as I mentioned. What's up, guys? How you guys doing this morning? You all look wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. Wait, is that bright-eyed and bushy-tailed?
Bright-eyed.
I think so.
It used to be a little more alliterative.
Spelling.
Didn't want to correct you.
You're welcome to correct me.
I just wanted to say common spelling.
The common spelling of bright is wide.
No. The common spelling of wide is bright.
I gotcha. You know, that's a perfect segue into today's topic. Let's just jump right into it, shall we?
Shall we?
Oh, man.
I think that, we may be still trying to figure out this podcast, but our transitions are bomb.com.
That's right.
That's what I like about it. So last time on the podcast, this is where we
Can I stop you?
Run a montage.
There are two transitions on this little track buttons you can push, and they're called Transition 2 and Transition 5.
Do you know what they are?
No. Do you
want to find out?
This is Transition 2. That's better than what you did.
Guys, we don't need this.
Let's never
Watch.
use that.
I'm not going to lie. I would be for replacing our theme song with Jake singing.
Well, that's actually how I wrote that song.
That'd be really funny.
I was walking home one day. It was my birthday. And I just started doing that with my mouth. And then I went and recorded it. You may not know this, but the song was originally about the merits of high-waisted jeans and the women who wear them just right. Which is an excellent segue into today's topic.
Something about bomb.com.
Transitions. Bomb.com.
Yeah.
All right. I think last time we were talking about whether or not it's the interlocutor's responsibility to determine whether or not they take your advice or something like this.
Yeah, we ended with something like that. I remember it just kind of came to my mind randomly as we were talking, and I was like, oh, that seems like an interesting thing. So like for me, where my head was at the time, and we can talk about whatever we want to, but this is what brought up the idea, was like this idea that there's something like belief inertia. Like you have a thought and you're constantly testing in the background. This is just a subroutine that your brain is doing. Is what I think is true still true? Yes. And the more experiences you have, the more likely you are to stop questioning that belief. It is just what you expect. Obviously, we've got things like self-fulfilling prophecies where it's like, I expect this thing, so no matter what data I receive, it's going to back up that conclusion. But the most interesting thing for me is this sort of dynamic that occurs when you believe something so strongly and then you have a trauma point that happens and it just shatters this belief. It shatters the confidence that you built over time. And then all of a sudden you go through your life and you're just kind of more timid in the situations you didn't used to be. For me, that occurred in, all growing up. I was like, I'm so smart. I can help people. I've given advice over and over again. It seems to be good. People like my advice and it helps. And then my intimate partner for a decade was following my advice, and I watched how that just was possibly the worst thing that she ever did. And for me, that shattered my confidence in giving advice. It was just like, I don't trust myself to do this anymore. And you said, well, let's talk about that, because isn't there a responsibility for the person listening to the advice? Like, they don't have to take your advice. So, like, do you really believe you're so powerful, or, maybe that wasn't the spirit?
There are so many places you could go with this conversation.
Let's start with a question. I think the question is something like, you've used the term, am I my brother's keeper?
Mm-hmm.
So, should we give others advice on life, unsolicited, even if it's with good intentions?
I'll tell you something that I have done. Obviously I kind of just gave my own background here, but I've definitely strayed away from giving advice the same way that I used to. I used to be very objective. Look at these are the facts. Obviously they lead us to this conclusion. Don't you agree? All right, here's what we do. These days I find myself saying, I don't know your story, but I'll tell you mine. This is my story. This is how it worked for me.
Yeah.
And that's about the most comfortable I can be right now. I don't know if I need more than that.
Yeah, I think that's a good start for sure. I'm trying to think, and maybe you guys can enlighten me. Trying to think if I give advice very often. I don't feel like I do, but do you guys personally feel like I give you advice? I know you and I have had conversations like when you were going through separation and stuff like that, specific to taking care of yourself. And you would give me the answer, yeah, but I need to figure this out myself. We actually just had this conversation again a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, so I have been thinking about that a lot recently. So I recently separated from my wife. I guess it's been about a year now. And you lived with us, I guess around 6 months before that actually happened. Correlation, causation, I don't know.
Yeah, it was probably
but you had recently gone through a pretty big moment in your own life that was similar. A lot of giant changes and revolutions in your life. And you kept kind of giving me this advice, like, you have to put yourself first. You have to take care of yourself. And I think you were, in retrospect, I'm realizing you were watching me live something that was unsustainable. I was kind of changing myself and muting myself so that I could be what I thought other people needed me to be. And so you would say this, and I was like, I believe you, man. I do. I'll try to take care of myself. I'll try to put myself first. And these words, I knew they meant something to you, but they didn't mean anything to me. Now, looking back a year later, I can be like, holy shit, I know exactly what that means. But until it clicked, it didn't click. And maybe that informs my position now as well in this whole, like, listen, this might not mean anything to you, but this is my story. This trauma occurred, or this test showed up in my life, and I was changed by it. There was a revelation of some sort, and now I kind of consider myself a different person. That may be different for you. I have to keep that in mind.
Yeah. I'm curious, did you feel like, I know it's been a while ago, and I'm trying to think about how I presented that information. I feel like, I know that I related it to you and your situation, but I feel like I presented the advice sort of how you're saying, which is, this is my experience. But I did in some way press that upon you as well. I'm trying to relate back to was I giving advice or was I telling my story sort of thing? How did you take it? How did you feel about it?
I took it as you giving advice. I mean, I knew it was your story. Obviously, we were very close as you were walking through all of that. So I had a lot of background in it. But again, like even in that moment, I was able to acknowledge this means something for you that it doesn't mean for me yet. I think it will someday, but right now I'm doing the best I can. Like, and that's the way it felt. It was like, put yourself first, put yourself first, put yourself first. And me just going, as far as I can tell, I am.
Yeah.
Like, look at, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. It wasn't enough, but I couldn't know that.
I think that's interesting because maybe too, even the situation with you and your wife, maybe how that person hears it's going to be different depending on the situation. So even if it is your story, it could still come off the wrong way. So maybe there's danger in it no matter what, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't share it.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I'm kind of going from this perspective of now I tell my story, and that does feel safer to me than specifically giving advice.
Sure.
Right. But I also thought it was interesting, the point that you brought up, like, what is the responsibility of the person hearing this advice? I mean, they must be in a pretty desperate place if they're going to somebody and saying, I'm just going to blindly listen to you. But people are in desperate places sometimes, I suppose.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, there's a big difference for me between sort of giving advice or like the brother's keeper type situation. I see a friend who is really off track on an addiction. This is a place, yes, I feel a responsibility to be a brother's keeper. And the second part that seems totally different to me is sort of being the catalyst for someone to change for a decade. That that's the one I would avoid,
I would venture to say there's some codependency happening there if it's a decade in. And
yeah. And it like I've had it happen in business. I've had it happen in all areas of my life where like it begins as this helpful thing and then someone sort of takes it as a fuel or something, catalyst. And they're like, okay, well, this is how I'm making it through this. And so I'll just rely on Frank to get the presentation done every time. And then I'm like, I got to shut this down. Like I was helping you. And now you need to do your own presentations or whatever. So I don't know. Especially solicited advice, I would give freely.
Sure.
If someone's asking a question.
Sure.
But also, if I just see something that seems like the truth that someone's blind to, I'll tell them that as well, even if they don't solicit it.
Yeah. I have this interesting sort of split in my behavior and my philosophy. And that is that you guys, I mean, we've talked about this. I oftentimes will back up 4 steps to take you to, one conclusion. And I do that because there's an implicit belief that maybe we don't know the same things or maybe we won't look at it the same way. So let's walk together. At the very same time, I'm really bad at assuming that people know what I know and have the same experience. Like I take those things for granted. So when I do this whole, like, this is my story thing, I think what I'm doing is trying to acknowledge, hey, you've solicited advice, but maybe you haven't been through the same experiences I have. Maybe you haven't had this conversation. Maybe you expect me to give you the right answer. And I want to, precurse this. I want to put an asterisk on it right away. This might not be the right answer, but this is the way I see it.
Sure.
Because otherwise you do get in this situation where they're like, oh yeah, Frank keeps doing the presentations.
Yeah. I mean, I know also when you like just sharing with the world, like on Twitter or something, when I share what I do or what works for me, which I share in a lot of ways in hopes that someone else might try it, but I try to share it as here's what I do, what I've done. Those seem to get more interaction from others, than just prescribed advice or something.
Sure. Well, you are the specialist at what you have done, right? You are the foremost expert in the world on that.
Yeah, everyone is that. Yep.
Something I saw recently, I was scrolling through Instagram, and it was this clip of Ram Dass, and he was talking to some interviewer, and the guy was like, well, you're this big guru now. People look at you and they think, what's this guy have for me? What's the big lesson he can give me? And his response was that his mantra is from Gandhi, who said, my life is my message. And he said, I don't think you do anything. I don't think you put this out into the world. You work on yourself. You become an environment which allows another person to grow. And if they're in that point of evolution where they wish to grow, they will. If they aren't, you leave them alone. Like, this is just me living my life, doing the best that I can for myself. And if people see it as a light, they can follow it. But
sure. Yeah. And I mean, I think in addition to that, I would say that like just making sure someone knows the truth, like especially if they're like sort of deluded or something, they don't have the whole picture. I feel like you should let them know. Then they can decide whether they want to grow, like leave them alone, all that. But oftentimes I feel like people are sort of walking around without the full picture, and others can be mirrors in valuable ways.
I agree with that entirely.
I wouldn't want others to suppress their mirror likeness.
Sure, others have been mirrors for me. They've helped me to see things I didn't know were there. I can't discount the value of that. That's been amazing for me.
Yeah, I mean, what you were saying, Ram Dass said, makes a lot of sense to me. This is a change I've made in my life over the last, since my, ex-wife and I separated, working on myself as my main focus, which is a lot of, I think, where my advice to you came from. Because when you get lost in a situation with another person specifically, so like in a romantic thing, or you tend to want to take care of the other person, but they want what's best for you. So I think if you lead with taking care of yourself, that you are somehow feeding that, and you are becoming what they need you to be. You're also becoming what you need to be. So I think that's what Ram Dass is saying.
Sure, I think that's a perfect application in that situation. I think there's this comedian, his name is Daniel Sloss. He's like Scottish guy or something. It's fun to listen to him talk. And he's got this entire stand-up routine. I feel like the name of it is something like Puzzle Piece. And he's like, the worst lie that Western society seems to tell everyone is that we are born incomplete. We are born as a, sort of puzzle piece that has this part chiseled out of us. And the only thing that could ever possibly make us feel whole is another person who happens to fit that puzzle piece exactly. Is like, this is the root of almost every issue, because everybody else is looking outside of themselves to find wholeness, to find peace, to find healing, whenever in reality they are already whole. And, that work that needs to be done is inside of ourselves. Mm-hmm. I think that's been the greatest lesson of, sort of walking away and being with myself over the last year or so, is like, man, there's so much here. There's so much undealt with. There's so much that I didn't know I was. And then all of a sudden, like, you step back from what you thought you were supposed to do, and it's all right there, right in front of you.
Yeah.
Huh.
You have a different experience?
Yeah, I think they're categorically the same to me.
Which ones?
Both Daniel Sloss's message that you don't need a puzzle piece, that you already have all the pieces to work on, and you just need to find the puzzle piece, and then you can put the puzzle together. Both miss the message, which is you don't need to put a puzzle together. You are complete now.
Well, I think that's what Daniel Sloss is saying. It's not a puzzle. Like, you're already whole.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's still, I don't know. They both seem sort of like focused on this idea that I need to do something inside myself to become complete or something.
Yeah. This is interesting. Interesting. Everything's interesting, you know? I don't know how far down the rabbit hole you want to go, but I think about this sometimes. I think about how essentially enlightenment is realizing I never should have taken a bite of that apple. Like, knowledge is what separated me from this wholeness. Knowledge is what made me believe I wasn't whole to begin with. But in walking away from the wholeness, as symbolized in that myth, I then was able to sort of find a redemption. I was able to find a wholeness from the brokenness. So for me, it's this question arises, and it is, would it have been better to never realize to never have gained the knowledge? Like, wouldn't it be better if I just never broke to begin with? And I think that's idealistic, because everyone has within them, whether society's given it to them, whether their own narrative has been structured a certain way, that I am in some way incomplete. And we could talk about an idealistic society hundreds, thousands of years into the future where everyone just knows from birth that it's all okay.
I think that's totally backwards.
What's that?
I think if you go 1,000 years backwards, nobody thought about whether they were complete. They're 100%. They know it. I'm just getting water for my family. I'm taking care of these people. But in the future, we will be less and less sure that we're complete. That's how I feel anyways.
Sure. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's like this whole idea of, the paleo diet. Like, we are Paleolithic animals living in a Neolithic society. We're not quite fit for this. I do think it's a little bit romanticized, though, because I just used at minimum a 6,000-year-old myth that essentially points to this very idea. And there are some that are much older. I think that it's a relative measure. We experience brokenness in a different way today, but I do think there's a lot to suggest that it's kind of just a human aspect. Like, ever since we gained a certain level of sentience, we have dealt with this disconnection from ourselves. We'll probably be talking about it thousands of years into the future as well. So I guess what I'm saying, and you don't have to take this as, gospel here, but what I'm saying is that it seems to be innate in sentient mammals that a brokenness occurs and there is a coming back. And I mean, I could raise my child from birth in the way that I think is perfect, to just be like, you're complete, you're whole, don't listen to the other messages. We could imagine some sort of utopia where this is the overwhelming message. I still think that just the nature of reality breaks that in some way.
Yeah, so I don't disagree that I messed up, I failed, whatever, I have to get back up and go again, is real in humans. It's also real in ants. But I doubt they have the strong sort of narrative around it that my purpose, like, I was created for this important reason, so I must overcome my unbecoming and get back up and get this piece of sugar back to the colony or whatever. And what I'm saying is, I don't know, for me, if the focused energy on this whole story helps.
Which story?
Whatever story, your unbecoming story, the hero, the rebirth, whatever, however you want to look at it. I just think there can be too much time spent on my own story for the good of society. Maybe that's what the point I'm trying to make is.
Yeah. No, I think I follow what you're saying.
And I really am trying to talk about the brother's keeper sort of scenario, which is like, if I spend 5 years trying to recover from some traumatic experience that 100 years ago was not a traumatic experience for anyone, so I've just defined it in a strange symbol, then I'm of less use to the people around me or whatever. Is this the ultimate good? I don't know. But I think some people really need this story. Maybe it really helps in some way.
Yeah, I mean, all I can tell is my own story, right? I grew up in evangelical Christianity, and in this story that we're all given, it's this idea of original sin, brokenness, and you have to come to atonement with the Father, and that there's only one way to do that. This is a story. It either connects with you or it doesn't. A lot of people it connects with, and they feel some sort of what you're talking about. This like, okay, I'm no longer worried about becoming something. I just am this thing. For me, it took, going internally and becoming very introspective and spending time with myself intentionally. And through that same period of time, I was reading a lot of story. I was reading a lot of stuff about mythology. What that allowed me to do was to sort of chart a map for what I was doing inside myself. It wasn't that the story saved me or made me better or anything like that. It just allowed me to sort of wake up on the page and the line in the story of me. And at that moment, I stopped feeling like I was reading this story about me, and I started feeling like I was the author and like I could do something in it. Yeah, so, cool. Joseph Campbell, like leading specialist over the last century on mythology, he says that idolatry is actually mistaking the symbol for the reference. And you'll find that sort of in all religion. But I think that's essentially what you're talking about, is saying like, we need to stop getting so messed up in the symbol and saying, oh, the symbol has so much value. No, it's referencing something much bigger, which is the story that's unfolding, whether we pay attention to it or not.
In some way, I think that, you like to say people should do what they think is cool. In some way, I think that is the same as Jake saying, I've been working on myself for the last year, trying to figure out who I am and what I want and all of these things. And for the last 10 years, I wasn't.
Yeah. I agree. It feels a little like long-winded.
Welcome to me. This is Jake.
But I think the idea is right.
Yeah. It is very weird, though, because I think that as humans, I referenced paleo, and it's this idea that, well, it would be better if you had never eaten corn for the first 6 years of your life or what have you. Like, your teeth would be healthier, your microbiota in your gut would be better, and all of these things. Mm-hmm. So we have this idea that like, well, of course it would have been better. And then there's this whole human value system thing. It would have been better if we had never believed we were broken to begin with. There would be nothing to come back from. At least, there's like this certain implicit belief. But at the same time, experiencing this sort of brokenness and then coming back is like, well, I've been eating pizza for the last 10 years of my life. And then I stopped eating pizza every day and I started eating whole foods for the last month. And whoa, like that revelation is actually very powerful.
I agree.
It changes consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, I think it changes it for even the ant, probably. Mm. If you fall off a brick enough times, you're probably like, I'm going to follow this ant. He doesn't seem to be doing that.
Yeah.
So at what point does learning these things about yourself become something that you share with others? Should you share it? Should you try to help other people on this path? Should you just put the information into the world so they can find it if they need to? I think that is one thing about this whole social media creator thing that is pretty cool, is that people can just put like you mentioned your Twitter stuff, like you can just put your knowledge and experience out into the world. And if somebody wants to find it and watch it, they can, or listen to it or whatever. Right. So I think that is a really cool thing, but where's that line between just putting information into the world and then pushing that onto somebody as advice or instruction of some sort?
Yeah. So for me, and this is what I mean by the myth is long-winded. The best thing I can do probably is just give an example. So for many years, like many years ago, I got off Facebook and I sort of found social media repellent and I just didn't want to engage with it. I often tell people like to lean into the things they find repellent, because it's usually some, like, especially if there's a large group of people who like it and you find it repellent, there's usually something there you should understand, I think. And so, but there's like a doing I'm talking about. Actually do it. The doing is the part that matters, I think, not the analysis.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm always in a place of internal analysis.
I do think that's an incredible insight into the Enneagram, where we can talk about that, because I think that fundamentally you and I have different experiences. You start at the 5, which is this very sort of internal, intellectual, analytical space. I start at the 7, but move toward 5. So for me, I actually find a lot of healing in this long-winded analysis of things. It helps me to mirror myself because it gives language to things that I didn't understand, a vocabulary of sorts. And so, and that's my whole point of being like, I used to think there was an answer and that one answer worked for everyone. But for me, I may find a degree of salvation, if we could use that word, in that analysis, knowing that it is not actually, what's helping me. The analysis isn't helping me, but it is giving me a bridge toward the place where I feel the doing as opposed to the thinking about doing.
Well, yeah. Also, do you think the analysis is cool?
Yes. That's a really good point.
You are doing it.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I was going to point out, is that there are people in this world where it's like, but wait, cataloging and describing the world is like, oh, I'm so excited about this. I had this moment like a week ago. Whenever I was like 14-year-old Jake, I thought it would be so cool to dress in a tweed jacket and vest and walk around with my leather briefcase in Oxford and be like a philologist and know everything about Greek and Latin and Hebrew and all this stuff. I saw this guy on YouTube about a week ago, and he was speaking perfect Koine Greek. And I realized that's what he thought was cool. He dove into it. If I had really thought it was cool instead of just something that I thought was prestigious, I would have dove into it too. But those hours would have been laborious and tedious for me. For him, it was life-giving. And it was like this moment of meeting my previous self and what I thought, I wanted, and being like, no, I'm not that guy. I'm someone else, and I get to be this.
Yeah.
But you have to go through that discovery. You have to go through being that guy who thought, oh, that would be cool, to find out that you didn't actually think it was cool.
That's the point, right? That's the 10 years of eating pizza before the year or the month of Whole Foods.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And I think that's the same thing as you're doing Facebook.
Yeah. So I have a real problem that you chose Facebook, but
you chose Facebook. I brought it back up.
No, I chose to say I got off of Facebook and now I'm doing social media.
It's interesting that you still have that reaction to it.
To Facebook? Mm-hmm. Why? Have you ever been on there?
Yeah, a long time ago.
No, recently you tried to make me a page admin. How was that?
That was terrible. Yeah, that's true. I do have to get on there for work too sometimes. It's awful.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think the doing is good. That's the thing with social media is, for so long, I've been sort of categorizing ideas and developing some worldview that really works for me. And the value of this to the world is pretty low if I don't share it. And so for me, like doing something with those ideas is what I think is cool. And it's not like natural for me or super easy, but it does seem to resonate with a lot of people, which is cool. And part of why I'm willing to do it, even though I don't love publicity or something. I'm like, there are a lot of bad ideas floating around out here. Maybe I should share some that seem less bad, even though they don't feel ready to share, but they're less bad.
I'm interested in that. I mean, I don't want to place a value system on this, but I think I am implicitly, or at least I'm observing a value system that I already have, and I don't know if I want it. And it's this, like if I look at an artist and the artist says, I painted a picture of this flower or whatever, and they put it out into the world and they do a gallery showing, like, was there an intention behind this creation, or was it just an expression of themselves? I created this song. It was me just struggling through my own inner battle, whatever. I put it onto a record. I put it out there for the world. For the most part, and I'm making some giant assumptions here, when we create art, we are just expressing for the sake of expression. And the result is the universe knows a little bit more about itself, sees the world through another set of eyes. When we create for the purpose of helping other people, it feels a little bit different to me. There's intent behind it. There's direction behind it. There's confidence behind it.
Engagement or something. But there's something about just being like authentically frank, and this seems to help people more than intent or something. So I think I see what you're saying. I don't know. Also, there's like this idea that you say the same thing 100 different ways because other people will hear it differently, or the 100th time might click or something. So I've had that happen to me where I'm like, someone in my life tells me the same thing for the 100th time, and I'm like, oh, I totally get it now,
For sure.
So some of those like more intentional creations seem to just be rephrasings of authenticity or something. But
I'd agree with that. Yeah, there's just always that balance.
Yeah, I think we should wrap this one up.
I'm for it.
Just be. You want to sing us out?
Be here now. What?
Just be.
Speaking words of wisdom.
Be and do what you think's cool.
Maybe those are the same.
Maybe
what about
if you
people
just be.
who think it's cool to murder?
No.
See you next week.
Hey, it's Frank again. Thanks for listening to an Origins episode of the Unbecoming Platypus podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. You can also check us out online at theunbecomingplatypus.com. We hope these conversations inspire you to improve your communication skills and deepen your connections with your own friends and loved ones. Until next time, this has been the Unbecoming Platypus podcast.